Before we begin, a quick content warning. Paranormal Pajama Party is a podcast about scary stories and legends, but there's nothing scarier than the patriarchy. When discussing tales in which women are often the villains, we'll have to unpack some stories in which women are the victims. Tonight's episode will discuss cyberbullying, decapitation, eating disorders, pregnancy, PTSD, sexual harassment, rape and death threats, and intense sexism. As always, there will be some cursing. Please listen with care. Have you heard of the women in refrigerators trope in fiction? It's where a female character gets horribly injured or dies just to motivate the male lead into action. On a completely unrelated note, my leg just fell off and I feel the end is near. It is my dying wish that you tell a friend about this podcast. Just one friend. Thanks. Alex steps cautiously into the abandoned asylum, his grip tightening on his shotgun. A former Green Beret, discharged for reasons even the president can't know. He's a lethal weapon even without the gun. He sniffs at the air. It's thick with the scent of decay and something far more sinister. What was that? A flicker of movement catches Alex's eye. A figure cloaked in shadow steps into the dim light. She's beautiful, with long, flowing hair and eyes that gleam with an unnatural light. Her skin is pale, almost translucent, and she wears a tattered dress that clings to her curvaceous form. Welcome, Alex. I've been waiting for you. But there's something off. Something monstrous beneath the surface. The gloom just behind her shifts, and something long and hairy stretches over her shoulder. It's a grotesque, tarantula-like spider leg. From her back sprout 7 more, reaching towards him around her otherwise perfect body. Her smile turns menacing. Now he can see her fangs. Stay back! What are you? I am the guardian of this place, the one who lures intruders to their doom. And you, Alex, are my latest plaything. Alex raises his shotgun, but the monster moves swiftly, her spider leg slashing through the air. His gun clatters from his hand onto the cement floor. I won't let you win, he growls. He reaches for the knife hidden in his boot, and the battle begins. The monster woman's movements are swift and deadly. Alex must use his wits and reflexes to survive. They clash in a deadly dance, dodging and striking, each blow echoing through the dark corridors. You can't escape me, Alex. You will be mine. Maybe it's the exertion, but the woman's deceptive beauty is fading quickly. Where there was once a beautiful woman, Alex sees nothing more than a hideous, mutant spider. With a final powerful strike, he lands a critical hit. The monster screams and collapses into a heap of twitching, hairy legs. In the dark, crumbling corridors of the asylum, Alex stands victorious. But then he sees something skitter out from beneath the body and run for the cover of darkness. He shudders. It looked like a baby, one with too many limbs. Hi, I'm Steph, and this is Paranormal Pajama Party, the podcast that brings you classic ghost stories and legends featuring female phantoms and femme fatales. Together, we'll brush the cobwebs off these terrifying tales to shed some light on their origins and learn what they can tell us about the deep-rooted fears society projects onto women. How was that voice acting? That was I thought I'd really go for it. I am home alone, so no one can hear me make a fool of myself until I publish this, which is neat. Last week, we opened Pandora's box and all the sexism of ancient Greek mythology came pouring out, showing us how female monsters have been used for thousands of years to embody society's fears and prejudices against women. We discussed how these myths have influenced modern perceptions and treatment of women, reinforcing harmful stereotypes and justifying patriarchal control. Throughout history, we've used monsters in our stories to define social limits and boundaries. As Donna Haraway notes, monsters symbolically police the borders of what is permissible. Monster stories caution us that crossing the lines of social norms puts us at risk of attack by whatever fearful thing is out there, or worse, becoming a monster ourselves. The monstrous women in the myths we discussed last week, Scylla and Charybdis, the Gorgons, the Sphinx, and the whole crew, acted as warnings. In fact, the word monster comes from the Latin monstrum, which means an unnatural portent or to warn. These monster girls served as cautionary tales about the dangers of nature, with which they were often associated, and about the potential chaos that could ensue if women were granted too much power. But as I said last week, mythology isn't the only place monster girls hide. Please welcome tonight's pixelated, pajama-wearing partygoers, the monster girls of video games. They lurk while misogynists leer. So, a quick recap on the monster girl trope. In the simplest terms, a monster girl is a female-coded creature that combines elements of human and monster. They often appear in pop culture. They're typically designed to be both alluring and terrifying, a mix of seductive beauty and grotesque horror. And this duality plays on male fears and anxieties about female sexuality, power, and autonomy. The fact that they pop up so often in video games, usually hypersexualized, to say the least, is kind of weird because gamers are not exclusively male, not exclusively straight, and not exclusively into objectifying women, as far as I can tell. But you wouldn't know it from looking at the mainstream video game industry itself or the way female characters appear on the screen. The video game industry has been criticized for its toxicity, especially towards women and minorities, for a long time. Video games may have started out being played by straight, white, young men, but the demographics have changed substantially, even over the last 20 years. According to the Entertainment Software Association's 2024 report on the U.S. video game industry, which I will link in the show notes for the nerds, in the U.S. today, players are still largely white, but 29% of players are aged 50 or older, 11% identify as members of the LGBTQ+ community, and nearly half, 46%, identify as female. The most recent numbers I could find for Australia are from 2019, but they show a similar gender breakdown. 47% of gamers identified as female. Despite the pool of players becoming more diverse, however, the industry still predominantly caters to that stereotypical straight, white, young male gamer. We talked in the last episode about the default human being a straight, white male in Western thought, so this isn't surprising, but it is icky. The good news is that things are improving a bit, which we'll talk about towards the end of the episode. But female characters in video games have had a tough time. Usually, they're non-playable characters, or NPCs. Historically, women are often portrayed in one of three ways: as sex trophies for the male protagonist to bone, as damsels in distress that either need saving or serve to inspire him with their gratuitous deaths, or as monstrous villains, who are, of course, the gals we're here to talk about tonight. Many of these monster girls have their origins in early tabletop and role-playing games, or RPGs, like Dungeons & Dragons. The first edition of D&D's Monster Manual is full of shapely women who want to eat you. In D&D and its grandsons, I guess, video games, there's a big difference between how male and female monsters are portrayed. Male monsters are typically scary because of their size, their strength, or their ferocity. They're meant to be physically intimidating. The horror of female monsters, on the other hand, is almost always rooted in their sexuality. Monster girls are seductive, but secretly deadly, or they're grotesquely pregnant, or they've aged out of their sexual attractiveness completely and become hideous old crones. Earlier today, I started to watch a video from feminist media critic Anita Sarkeesian's series Tropes versus Women in Video Games, and I had to stop like 2 minutes in because it was one of those horrifying reminders that none of us ever had an original idea in our whole lives. That's happened to you, I'm sure. She starts out by talking about the monsters of Greek mythology, and that's when I had to push pause because it was basically, I don't know, everything I wrote for last week's episode of Paranormal Pajama Party, but better. I want to finish it, but I was scared to do it before I wrote this episode because I was worried that I would just like subconsciously steal all of her well done work and rehash what she's already said. So maybe I have done that. I'll find out later. I'll put a link to the video in the show notes. It's a great watch, or at least the first 120 seconds were. I did make it as far as her discussing video game designers' formula behind the creation of the only female monster in Doom 3. The formula is sexy plus gross equals creepy. This monster that she's talking about has the torso of a topless woman, on the legs and abdomen of a giant spider, and she's also pregnant with some kind of freaky spider baby that you have to fight and kill. I know I earlier said I was going to do something for the nerds. Full disclosure, I'm the nerd because I read a fabulous dissertation that I want to tell you about now. This one was by Sarah Stang. Big shout out to Dr. Stang. I'm not a gamer and I'm leaning on her work pretty heavily for the rest of this episode. Please find the link to her actual paper in, you guessed it, the show notes. This formula of sexy plus gross equals creepy is pretty typical in monster creation. Stang points out that female monsters in games, and this includes RPGs like D&D, often fall into one of three archetypes: maiden, mother, or crone. The maiden is sexual and seductive. The mother is pregnant or associated with childbirth. The crone is an older woman who is supposed to no longer be sexually attractive to the male player. These archetypes reinforce traditional patriarchal views of women's roles and worth, reducing them to their sexual status and their potential for motherhood. These are also the three faces of the triple goddess. Triple goddesses have popped up in lots of societies throughout history. We actually talked about one last season on the Females, Felines, and Fear episode. It was Hecate. The triple goddesses are also an important part of many neo-pagan religions. Please don't come for me, Wiccans, but I don't know how to feel about her. I'm conflicted. From what I've been reading, she's usually a celebration of women for neo-pagans, and that's cool. I'm down with that. But personally, I kind of hate that it boils womanhood down to 3 life stages, and also those stages seem to revolve around the role the female body plays for men. I also don't love that the whole thing seems predicated on the idea of women as, like, nurturing and emotional and intuitive, which kind of seems like its own sort of sexism. And what about those of us whose lives don't follow this path, who go straight from maiden to crone and skip motherhood altogether? What about people like me who were just born crones, just straight out of the womb crones? I like crocheted blankets and Murder, She Wrote and grape nuts, and by golly, those kids better stay off my lawn. But the video game industry doesn't care how I feel about the triple goddess and this breakdown of women's lifespans. So their monstrous female characters stick to the hits: maiden, mother, crone. Monsters who fit the maiden archetype are the ones I think of when I think of monster girl. They're typically young, beautiful, and naturally hypersexualized. They use their attractiveness as a weapon to lure male characters to their doom. I've talked about why the seductress stereotype is problematic before. It reinforces the idea that women are deceptive. Our pretty features or bodies are just masking the chaotic evil underneath until we can trap a man in our clutches. The Wikipedia entry for Monster Girl specifically references the bubblehead nurses from Silent Hill 2. For those of us without the hand-eye coordination to game, I would describe them as faceless women wearing basically a sexy nurse Halloween costume with a super low-cut top and a pretty tight miniskirt and low heels. According to the Female Villains Fandom Wiki, which is a hole that I will be falling down, their heads face downward, appearing swollen and bloodied and covered in gauze, convulsing violently as they wobble to their target. Their only visible facial feature are bloody, exposed jaws and teeth. When inspected closely, the last 4 fingers of their hands seem to be fused. They emit shrieks and gurgles. I was going to play a clip of them here, but I looked it up on YouTube and, it's just shrieks and gurgles. So they may not be ready for radio, but they've really got the whole dangerous sexual allure and unsettling physicality thing down pat. The mother archetype is a real fertile myrtle. Last season, in the Coraline episodes, I talked about Barbara Creed's theory of the monstrous feminine, and specifically about the archaic mother. The gist of the monstrous feminine is that in patriarchal societies, horror media is often defined by what scares men. And in horror, the archaic mother is the source of all life and the ultimate power, but she's also a terrifying and uncontrollable force. And worse, she doesn't even need a man. This archetype is all about the fear surrounding women's ability to create life. Again, I don't game, but I am on the internet a lot. And I vividly remember this weird couple of weeks back in 2021 when all of these dudes were tweeting about how badly they wanted to be stepped on by some giant woman named Lady Dimitrescu. I didn't understand it then, and I don't understand it now, but I can tell you that Lady D from Resident Evil Village is a mommy.
Mother, I bring you fresh prey.
You are so kind to me, daughters. Now, let's take a look at him. Well, Ethan Winters. You escaped my little brother's idiot games, did you? Let's see how special you are.
Yes, Mother.
Yes, Mother.
She is 9.5 feet tall, which is more than 3 meters for my Australian friends. Super pale with dark lipstick and a black bobbed haircut. And she's dressed like a 1930s movie star in this really long white gown and wide black hat. She's very glamorous. She's gorgeous, but she's also a vampire with massive hidden claws. She lives in a rundown castle with her daughters, 3 super attractive science experiments turned corpse-eating monsters who are, wouldn't you know it, examples of the maiden archetype. So we know she can make more monsters whenever she wants. And she's also secretly a super scary, unattractive, dragony, tentacly woman thing. Once again, so deceptive. Lady D is also an example of one of the reasons monster girls often appear in erotica. In the game, she's always lifting the male hero up over her head, so there are multiple shots down the front of her dress. Unsurprisingly, fan-made art popped up around the launch of Resident Evil Village, and a lot of it was focused on female dominance and fetishism. Men like monster girls because they might take control. Not too much control, of course. Only when a man asks for it. And they have to give it back later. Finally, the crone archetype enforces the idea that women lose their value once they're no longer young and beautiful. It's a reflection of societal anxieties about aging and the devaluation of women who are no longer seen as sexually attractive. The Witcher games go hard on the hags and crones, and on the sexist language, so here's a nice, offensive in-game description of a monster from The Witcher 3 called the Water Hag. Folk say water hags are drowners' wives. If that be true, 'tain't no wonder why they're such ornery bitches, says Shemhel of Dregston. Sure. Some tales mention water hags and swamp bints masquerading as lost old women to lure travelers back to the rickety shacks they build in the wetlands. In truth, only a blind man, or a sighted man blinded with drink, could mistake the rank sludge and rotting carrion of a water hag's den for a cozy cottage, and the hideous hag herself for an innocent grandmother. Their wrinkled, wart-covered bodies stand nearly 2 yards tall, with skin the color of a long dead cadaver and stinking of muck and fish. Bony growths 2 spans long stick out from their backs, with hair like a tangle of seaweed and claws that would make a werewolf proud, completing the picture. What that description doesn't include is their drooping breasts and their bulging bellies. Again, I'd play a clip, but they mostly kind of grunt and growl until the hero, Geralt, murders them brutally. Like, I have never seen a video game kill people so hard. The point is, there is no mistaking any part of this for sexy at all. The developers clearly want you to think that these critters are gross, and they use the female body to get that message across. A crone character's age also associates her with something powerful and ancient, and if we learned anything last week, that means a man has to kill her dead. And that's the thing about monster girls of video games. They all have to be killed. To progress in the game, the player, whose avatar is usually a man, has to destroy female monsters, often for no justifiable reason at all, like Medusa's head being severed from her body just because it was a king's birthday. It must be a strange experience for female players. These women who look like you must be attacked and killed. What kind of message does that send about your role in this world? Interestingly, female portrayals in video games can actually influence players' behavior in the games, towards themselves and others. Objectification theory suggests that women who are socialized in cultures where they see themselves repeatedly depicted in sexualized or dehumanized ways can lead to self-objectification. It's why we internalize impossible beauty standards or freak out when we get our first gray hair. This can turn into intense self-policing and shame and can result in things like depression and eating disorders. There's another phenomenon in psychology called the Proteus effect, in which a person in a virtual environment, like a video game, changes their behavior based on what their avatar looks like. We do this because we know the expectations other people have in this environment based on the way our avatar looks. It's basically like code switching based on your body. For example, in one study, women playing a virtual reality game in which their avatars were sexualized versions of their real selves started to change their behavior in the game to be more accepting of rape myths like victim blaming. The old, she was asking for it the way her digital avatar was dressed. Beyond video games, I can see this having repercussions in the metaverse, if that's where Mark Zuckerberg says we're all headed. On the flip side, other studies have shown that men asked to play games using sexualized female avatars began to show reduced hostile sexism and less acceptance of rape myths. Turns out your attitude changes when you're the one being objectified. The good news is that violent video games don't cause school shootings, and sexist video games probably don't cause real-world sexism either. A longitudinal study out of Germany showed no link between increased levels of sexism and people who spent a lot of time gaming. The bad news is that in the virtual worlds where gamers interact, and in gaming communities, hostile sexism is a serious problem. And when people push back, the reaction is severe. Enter GamerGate, one of the most notorious and harmful events in the history of video game culture. GamerGate was a misogynistic harassment campaign and a right-wing backlash against what some gamers perceived as woke culture infiltrating video games. This all happened in 2014 and 2015 mainly, and it targeted women in the video game industry, including critic Anita Sarkeesian, who I mentioned earlier, and developers Zoe Quinn and Brianna Wu. In August 2014, a blog post by Quinn's ex-boyfriend falsely insinuated that their latest game, Depression Quest, had received a good review because of their sexual relationship with a games journalist. This led to massive harassment campaigns among communities on 4chan, 8chan, and Reddit. Quinn faced rape threats and death threats. The initial claim was debunked. There was no evidence of a conflict of interest, and the journalist in question never reviewed Quinn's game. Despite this, the harassment expanded to include anyone who defended Quinn. They documented months of harassment, including doxing, which is when details like your home address are shared publicly online, that forced them to flee their home. Quinn said at a conference, "I used to go to games events and feel like I was going home. Now it's just like, are any of the people I'm currently in the room with ones that said they wanted to beat me to death?" Sarkeesian had been targeted as early as 2012 for that YouTube series I mentioned, Tropes versus Women in Video Games. When she released a new episode in 2014, it triggered another wave of rape and death threats, along with doxing. Sarkeesian had to cancel a university appearance after someone threatened a mass shooting at the event, claiming that they would model it after a 1989 anti-feminist mass shooting in Montreal. Wu, another game developer, faced similar harassment and threats. The sustained abuse eventually led to her being diagnosed with PTSD. GamerGaters claimed that she, Quinn, and Sarkeesian were making the harassment up. This harassment was framed by the perpetrators as a campaign for ethics in video game journalism. They claim to be protecting that gamer identity we talked about, that's not even real, and opposing the influence of feminists and other progressives on the industry. In reality, GamerGate was a mess, just a mess. The loudest voices called it a movement, but to be a movement, you need things like goals and coherent messages and actual leaders instead of a bunch of cowards hiding behind 4chan avatars. It was essentially a terrorist campaign primarily aimed at excluding women and marginalized groups from the gaming industry and intimidating them into silence. And it didn't end in 2015. Journalist David Nywert wrote, "GamerGate heralded the rise of the alt-right and provided an early sketch of its primary features, an internet presence beset by digital trolls, unbridled conspiracism, angry white male identity victimization culture, and, ultimately, open racism, anti-Semitism, ethnic hatred, misogyny, and sexual and gender paranoia." Several of the especially douchey pundits supporting GamerGate went on to high-ranking positions in the alt-right, and the guy who attacked Nancy Pelosi's husband in 2022 explained his slide into far-right sewage began with his involvement in GamerGate. An FBI investigation was opened into the events, but no arrests have ever been made. Law enforcement agencies are less inclined to prioritize cyber harassment cases because the perpetrators are hard to track down and the penalties aren't very strong. In 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that online threats are not necessarily prosecutable true threats. But believe it or not, things are getting a little better for the monster girls, and the rest of us girls too. Contemporary media is starting to show us more monster girls like Marceline the Vampire Queen from Adventure Time. Not only is she a vampire, but she can transform into various monstrous creatures. Her transformations are not sexy or sparkly, and the creatures she changes into are not cute. But she usually does it to help her friends, who accept and even celebrate her for being who she is. Here's a clip from a scene of her transforming into a giant black tentacled slime monster the size of a house.
Finn, you do not want to go down that road with me.
With you, I would walk down any road, my lady, especially if it leads to the movies.
Oh yeah? No one would want to go to the movie with... What do you think of me now?
How do you like your popcorn?
In the real world, bills are being introduced and slowly passed into law that protect victims of cyber harassment. Here in Australia, we have an e-safety commissioner whose whole job is to support people who have been targeted by cyberbullying, harassment, or revenge porn. The rise of deepfakes terrifies me, but legal experts are finding new ways to apply existing legislation to keep up with emerging technology. And video games seem to be getting better too. In a lot of ways, GamerGate failed, and there are some very cool video games out there taking a completely new approach to the medium. Staying mentions Undertale, a game with the tagline, "The RPG game where you don't have to destroy anyone." In the game, your genderless avatar is given a choice. You can attack everyone you come across the way you would in a more traditional video game, or you can choose to befriend the monsters you run into. The game's ending changes based on the choices you make along the way. I'm not saying video games can't be scary or have scary female-coded characters, of course. I'd just like it if they were a little more creative than the old sexy plus gross equals creepy template. And one easy way to inject some variety into game design would be to inject some diversity into the gaming industry. While you'd need to be careful of cultural appropriation, the world's folklore and mythology are full of terrifying monsters that could inspire new characters. We've come across a few of them on this podcast already. And even if you do rely on a scary lady as your big bad at the end, she doesn't have to be the same old maiden, mother, or crone cliche. She doesn't have to be scary because she has a vagina or a womb, and she doesn't have to be portrayed with huge boobs. I'm just saying there are options. I think Gladys, the super intelligent computer system from Portal, is a great example of a female-coded character whose menace has nothing to do with her body parts, because she doesn't have any.
Please note that we have added a consequence for failure. Any contact with the chamber floor will result in an unsatisfactory mark on your official testing record, followed by death. Good luck.
And maybe, just maybe, if you had people of all genders and backgrounds in the room, you could appeal to a broader audience. They're already playing games, and they want to give you money, video game developers. If we have to have capitalism, let's at least make it work for good. All of this being said, I gotta admit that I love the monster girl trope in movies. I especially love that she's kind of the anti-final girl. I'd much rather a complex, unhinged monster girl make it to the end of the movie than an underdeveloped scream queen who survives just because she's a virgin. I also love monster girls whose monstrousness is born out of how frustrating and scary it is to be a girl, because it is. It's really, really scary. If I could bite the head off of the next creep who tries to feel me up on the bus, or only responds to my husband, even though I'm the one who asked a question, you bet your boots I would. I don't even have to look cute doing it. It's time for lights out at the Paranormal Pajama Party. Honestly, I think the monster girls prefer it that way. They always hiss appreciatively when I hit the switch. To learn more about Monster Girls, GamerGate, and D&D's Monster Manual, check out my sources in the show notes. Follow Paranormal PJ Party on Instagram to see visuals from today's episode. I'll be back next week with more spine-tingling tales and critical discussion. In the meantime, don't forget, ghosts have stories, women have voices. Dare to listen.